It was supposed to be just another study session at my friend's house, a quiet evening with textbooks and notes. The street was calm, the kind of early evening that felt suspended in time, when the air carries the faint scent of rain and freshly cut grass. As I walked up the steps, I noticed how cozy the house looked from outside. Warm lights spilling through the windows, shadows of furniture hinting at the life within. The door opened, and there she was, my friend's mom, early 40s, moving with a quiet elegance that immediately caught my attention. She wore a simple sweater, the kind that seemed ordinary until it framed her in the soft glow of the hallway light. Her hair was loosely tied back, and her eyes held the kind of warmth that made strangers feel seen. The first smile she offered was subtle, but it lingered longer than expected, brushing against something in me that I hadn't felt before. "Glad you could make it," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying the ease of someone used to managing a household, but also a hint of curiosity. There was nothing overt in her tone, yet it carried an attention that made me self-conscious in a way that was thrilling without being inappropriate. Inside, the house smelled faintly of home-cooked meals and lavender, a comforting blend that immediately settled my nerves. The living room was well kept, with books stacked neatly on a low table, framed photographs on the walls, and a soft rug that seemed to invite bare feet. Each small detail spoke of care and habit, of a life lived with intention. As she moved through the kitchen, asking if I wanted a glass of water, I noticed how naturally her movements commanded the space without ever seeming imposing. She handed me the glass, and our fingers brushed lightly. Accidental, maybe, but it lingered in a way that made me pause. There was an unspoken awareness in the way she looked at me, as if she noticed more than just my presence. We walked through the living room, her guiding gestures casual yet purposeful, showing me the study area where I would be working. She commented on the books and the layout, but it wasn't just polite conversation. There was a quiet interest, subtle probing into who I was beyond being her son's friend. Every glance, every small smile, every gentle gesture seemed designed to make me feel welcome, yet alert to something unspoken. When she stepped back to let me settle into a chair, there was a pause. A silence that wasn't awkward, but electric. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, soft and floral, lingering as she moved away. My attention lingered on the small details. The curve of her shoulder, the way her hair caught the light, the subtle tilt of her head as she watched me from across the room. And in that pause, I realized something strange. I hadn't just come to study. I had stepped into a house that already felt charged with something unexpected. Warmth, attention, curiosity, and attention that made my heart beat a little faster than it should. Something told me this evening was going to be far more complicated than algebra and essay notes. It wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of a slow, unspoken pull, one that neither of us fully understood yet, but would soon realize was impossible to ignore. Later that evening, the house had grown quiet. My friend had retreated to his room, leaving me in the living room with the faint hum of a ceiling fan and the soft tick of the wall clock. That's when she appeared, carrying a bag of groceries. She looked at me, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. "Can you help me with these?" she asked, her tone casual, yet there was an unspoken weight in the request. I nodded, and as we moved together toward the kitchen, our hands brushed over the bags, over the handles, light, accidental, yet it sent an unexpected jolt through me. She laughed softly when I flinched slightly. "Careful," she said, her voice warm, teasing, yet gentle, as if she enjoyed testing boundaries just enough to make the moment electric. The kitchen was filled with soft light from the overhead lamp, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. The scent of herbs and fresh bread mingled with a faint trace of her perfume, a delicate jasmine note that seemed to wrap around me. She set down a bag and handed me a knife to slice vegetables, her fingers brushing mine again as she reached across the counter. My heart raced, though the gesture was innocent, domestic, and completely natural in context. We worked side by side, talking quietly, small talk that gradually drifted toward personal details. She asked about my studies, my routines, and eventually about my life beyond academics. There was no judgment in her voice, only curiosity and subtle attention. And I noticed how her eyes would linger, how her smile softened when I answered honestly. It was a warmth I hadn't expected, a gentle kind of interest that made me aware of every shift in her posture, every subtle movement. At one point, she paused, leaning slightly to reach for a jar on the shelf. Her arm brushed mine, and for a brief second, I could feel the warmth of her skin through her sweater. She didn't pull away quickly, letting the contact linger just long enough for me to feel it, yet not long enough to be inappropriate. The tension was quiet, understated, but undeniable. We laughed over a small mishap, a tomato rolling off the counter, and our hands touched again as we both reached for it. Her laugh echoed softly in the kitchen, low and genuine, and it lingered in the room long after the sound faded. That laughter, combined with the closeness, made the air between us feel charged, electric, yet completely safe. By the time we had finished unpacking the groceries, a subtle shift had occurred. The space between us had narrowed, not just physically, but emotionally. There was a new awareness, a quiet curiosity, a magnetic pull neither of us spoke about, yet both felt. The evening had started as a simple favor, a mundane act, but it had become a delicate dance of proximity, touch, and unspoken connection. As she glanced at me, smiling softly while wiping her hands on a towel, I realized that the boundaries I thought were clear were now blurred. There was a tension, tender and secret, forming between us, something that neither words nor actions fully explained, but something that would grow stronger with each encounter. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm. My friend was upstairs, likely lost in his own world of homework and video games, leaving the two of us alone in the living room. The soft hum of the ceiling fan and the muted glow of the table lamp created a cocoon of warmth. I was seated on the couch, textbooks open but barely read, my attention increasingly drawn to the subtle presence beside me. She appeared with a blanket in her hands, moving closer to drape it over my shoulders. Her touch was brief, casual, but electric, the warmth of her hand lingering longer than expected. I felt a jolt, not just from the physical contact, but from the awareness of how deliberate yet natural her movement was. The scent of her perfume, faint jasmine mingled with something warm and familiar, wrapped around me. As she adjusted the blanket, she leaned in slightly, close enough for her hair to brush my temple. Her voice dropped to a whisper, soft and teasing, yet carrying a weight that made my heart skip. "If anyone finds out, you'll be in big trouble." The words were simple, but they held layers of meaning. Playful warning, curiosity, and an unspoken desire coiled together in that single sentence. It was as though she was testing the boundaries of propriety while hinting at something forbidden, thrilling, and dangerous, all at once. I swallowed hard, trying to mask the rush of heat rising in my chest. The room seemed smaller in that moment, every sound amplified. The soft ticking of the clock, the distant hum of the city outside, the faint rustle of her sweater as she shifted slightly. My own heartbeat felt impossibly loud, synchronized with the subtle rise and fall of her breath. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds, the silence thick yet charged, a pause heavy with possibility. I wanted to look away, to regain some composure, but couldn't. Her eyes, steady yet playful, held mine. There was no demand in them, no expectation, just an invitation, a fragile opening into something neither of us had fully acknowledged. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare voice, the thrill of secrecy intertwining with the growing tension between us. We settled into the couch, side by side, not touching yet acutely aware of proximity. The air seemed to hum with unspoken words. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the way she adjusted the blanket, the quiet curve of her smile, pulled me deeper into a current I couldn't resist. By the time my friend's footsteps echoed from upstairs, the moment had passed physically, but not emotionally. I was left with a new awareness, a heightened sense of tension, and a silent acknowledgement that nothing between us could remain the same. That whisper had changed everything. The evening ended like it had begun, ordinary to an outsider, but for us, a delicate web of curiosity, attraction, and the thrill of secrecy had been woven. And as I lay in bed later, replaying the moment over and over, I realized that the warning, "If anyone finds out, you'll be in big trouble," was more than playful teasing. It was the beginning of something impossible to ignore. The days that followed the whispered warning were strange, a quiet tension threading through every interaction, subtle but impossible to ignore. Every glance seemed to linger, every casual brush of hands felt charged, and the house itself seemed to hum with an awareness I couldn't name. I caught myself noticing small things I hadn't before. The way her hair caught the light in the kitchen, the soft curve of her smile when she laughed at something mundane, the faint warmth that radiated from her even in passing. It wasn't just attraction, it was the collision of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper, more complicated. There was guilt, too, because this wasn't supposed to happen. She was my friend's mom. There were lines drawn by years and social expectation. Yet, the pull was undeniable, as if some invisible force had begun to bridge the gap between us. She noticed, too, though she never addressed it directly. There were fleeting touches, her hand brushing mine while passing a plate, a casual arm against my shoulder when showing me a book, lingering glances that both invited and tested my awareness. I caught her watching me, sometimes from across the kitchen, a faint smile hinting an unspoken acknowledgement of attention. The internal conflict was maddening. Rational thought screamed for distance, for propriety, yet every instinct urged me to stay close, to linger in the warmth of her presence. Every time we spoke, our words were layered, mundane on the surface, but weighted with subtext. A casual question about homework carried an undertone of attention. A joke about spilled coffee became a pretext for her hand to touch mine. One evening, I found myself in the living room while she was folding laundry. Her hands moved with practiced ease, yet her movements seemed slower, more deliberate when I was near. I offered to help, and our fingers brushed as we handed each other clothes. The contact was brief, but it sent a wave of awareness through me, a reminder of the precarious balance between desire and propriety. I began to notice moments that were not touches but felt just as intimate. The soft exhale when she glanced at me, the tilt of her head when listening, the quiet way she seemed to center herself near me. Every small gesture pulled at something I didn't yet understand, a longing that was thrilling and terrifying all at once. And yet, I couldn't act. The weight of boundaries, of social expectation, held me back, creating a constant tension between what I felt and what I could express. I began to wonder if she felt the same, if the subtle touches, the smiles, the way she let her presence linger, were hints of an emotion she dared not name. By the time night fell, the conflict had left me restless. Alone in my room, I replayed every interaction, every brush of skin, every glance that lingered a heartbeat too long. The house was quiet, but inside me, a storm raged, desire, guilt, admiration, and fear interwoven into a knot I couldn't untangle. It was clear that nothing would remain the same between us. The whispered warning, playful as it seemed, had opened a door. And now, standing on the edge of that door, I was terrified and exhilarated by what might come next. The storm came without warning that night, rain lashing against the windows and wind rattling the shutters. The house seemed to shrink in the downpour, the outside world reduced to a distant blur of shadows and sound. Upstairs, my friend's room was empty, leaving the living room as a small island of warmth and soft light. She appeared there with a blanket, carrying it almost casually, but the way her eyes lingered on mine told me it was anything but ordinary. We settled on the couch, side by side, the blanket draped loosely over our shoulders. The quiet of the storm outside made the air between us heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. Every small movement, the way she adjusted the fabric over my lap, the subtle tilt of her head when she glanced at me, felt intimate, deliberate, yet entirely natural. Her perfume, faint and comforting, mingled with the scent of rain seeping through the open window, creating a sensory memory that clung to me. "I hate nights like this," she admitted quietly, her voice low and slightly trembling. "They make me feel lonely, like I'm pretending to be stronger than I am." The words caught me off guard. She wasn't teasing or playful. She was bare in her vulnerability, and it was startling how human she felt in that moment. I turned slightly toward her, offering quiet attention, unsure what to say. "I don't know how to be alone sometimes," she continued, her fingers brushing mine under the blanket, casual yet intimate. The touch was brief, but sent a shiver of awareness through me, highlighting the closeness we now shared in that small, storm-lit room. We didn't need to speak. The silence between us was filled with empathy and the kind of connection that words often ruin. Her gaze met mine, steady and searching, as if weighing the consequences of every thought and emotion we hadn't dared to voice. The storm outside was loud, but inside, the quiet intimacy was louder, deeper, a heartbeat we were both tuned to. Her hand lingered near mine, almost brushing against my arm, and I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. The electricity between us wasn't overt or forceful, but it thrummed quietly, persistent, impossible to ignore. Each glance, each small gesture built a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. She leaned back slightly, resting against the cushions, and the blanket shifted to cover our laps more fully. Her eyes softened as she looked at me. "I shouldn't. I mean, you're my son's friend. But I don't know why it feels like this with you." The honesty in her voice, the tremor of unspoken desire, made the moment feel sacred and fragile. I didn't respond immediately because no words could encapsulate the mix of emotions, the longing, the guilt, the thrill of connection that surged between us. As the rain slowed outside, I realized that everything had changed. The whispered warning, the subtle touches, the lingering glances, it had all led to this. A night where vulnerability stripped away boundaries, leaving two hearts dangerously close yet painfully aware of the lines they could not cross. By the time the storm passed, the room felt different, warmer, closer, yet charged with unspoken possibility. The night had shifted everything between us, and neither of us could pretend the tension wasn't there. The days following that stormy night were suffused with a quiet tension that neither of us dared to name aloud. Every interaction felt heightened, subtle gestures carrying weight far beyond their surface meaning. Helping her with chores, setting the table, carrying groceries. These mundane tasks had become a delicate dance of proximity and restraint. Each small touch, each accidental brush of hands, seemed deliberate and yet entirely innocent, leaving a thrill lingering long after the moment had passed. She laughed softly at minor mishaps, her eyes catching mine with a flicker that was more than amusement. When she leaned over to adjust a shelf, her arm brushed mine. When she passed a cup of tea, her fingers lingered slightly longer than necessary. I noticed the rhythm of her movements, the careful way she let our hands meet briefly before withdrawing, a teasing balance between intimacy and propriety. Every gesture felt like a test, a way to explore the connection between us without crossing boundaries we both instinctively respected. One afternoon, she asked for help fixing a wobbly chair in the study. Kneeling beside her, my hand rested near hers on the leg of the chair, almost touching. She didn't move away, only allowed the moment to linger, a subtle acknowledgement of the unspoken current between us. Her eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the air around us held a different charge, thick with possibility and restraint simultaneously. Our conversations had begun to carry layers that weren't there before. Casual remarks about her garden, my studies, or a recipe she was trying suddenly felt charged, like code only we understood. Every glance, every pause, every tilt of her head was weighted with emotion, unspoken yet unmistakable. The playful teasing from the whispered night resurfaced, her words echoing in my mind whenever she smiled knowingly, allowing just enough contact to make my chest tighten. Even ordinary moments became electric. Sharing a couch while folding laundry, her hand brushing mine as we passed items back and forth. Standing side by side in the kitchen, our shoulders grazing as we prepared tea. Each small brush of skin, each shared smile, deepened the connection without a single overt declaration. The tension between us was no longer hidden. It existed in the quiet spaces, the brief silences, and the electricity of small touches. Yet beneath the thrill was a careful awareness of the rules we couldn't break. Every touch was deliberate, measured, respectful. She tested the boundaries, and I followed, both of us acutely aware of what could not be said, what could not be done. It was a dance, intricate and slow, with each step bringing us closer, yet keeping us apart, a perfect balance of desire and restraint. By nightfall, the house felt charged, as if holding its breath along with us. I realized then that this testing of boundaries wasn't casual or playful anymore. It had become essential. Every brush of hands, every lingering glance, every subtle gesture was a thread weaving us closer, building tension that neither words nor actions could fully release. And deep down, I knew we were both waiting for the moment when one of us would finally risk crossing the line, and neither of us knew what would happen when that line was inevitably approached. Morning arrived slowly, with sunlight spilling softly through the curtains and illuminating the familiar shapes of the living room. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the air fresh, scented faintly with rain and the lingering warmth of the house. For the first time, the space felt different, alive with the quiet tension and closeness that had been building between us, now transformed into something more comfortable, more intimate. She appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, her hair slightly tousled from sleep, a soft smile playing on her lips. She didn't speak immediately, simply standing there for a moment, letting the morning light frame her. Every detail, the gentle curve of her shoulders, the calmness in her expression, the warmth radiating from her presence, pulled at something inside me, a mix of admiration, respect, and quiet longing. We sat together at the kitchen table, the air calm, but charged in the way that only shared understanding can create. The conversation was light, almost mundane, comments on the weather, the city waking up outside, plans for the day. Yet, beneath it all was an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection we had forged. Every glance, every fleeting brush of fingers across the table, spoke volumes more than words ever could. Her hand found mine briefly as she passed me a cup. It was simple, fleeting, almost accidental, yet electric in its subtlety. The warmth of her touch, the softness of her skin against mine, carried all the emotions we hadn't dared to voice: trust, affection, curiosity, and the gentle thrill of forbidden closeness. I noticed the slight catch in her breath, the delicate tilt of her head, and realized that she, too, felt the weight and meaning of the moment. For a while, we sat in companionable silence, allowing the quiet intimacy to settle around us. The house no longer felt like someone else's, nor did it feel like a temporary space. It felt lived in, warm, and shared, a reflection of the bond that had slowly grown between us. The tension from past days, from whispered warnings and fleeting touches, had softened into a gentle rhythm of mutual awareness and respect. She spoke softly, almost as if testing the air. "You make this house feel easier, somehow. More alive." I smiled, a mixture of honesty and relief in my expression. "You make it impossible to ever leave," I said, realizing the truth in my words. The acknowledgement hung between us, simple but profound, and for the first time, the complicated feelings that had been swirling for weeks felt steady, grounded, and human. We moved through the morning together, performing ordinary tasks with extraordinary awareness of each other's presence. Every small gesture, a shared glance, the subtle touch of a hand, a quiet laugh, was a reminder of the unspoken connection we now shared. It was not dramatic, not overt, not reckless. It was warm, steady, and entirely ours. By midday, The story had reached its natural conclusion. The whispered warning, the tests of proximity, the stormy night of vulnerability, all had led to this quiet resolution. We understood each other in ways words could not convey. The age difference, the social boundaries, the forbidden thrill, all were present, acknowledged, yet held with respect. And in that gentle morning light, it became clear this connection, slow burn and delicate, had found its place. It was home,